My name is Isabella Reed. I am 31 years old. 3 years ago, my mother shattered me when she told our extended family at a reunion that my tech career was just a hobby and that I needed to find a real match who could elevate the family name rather than sticking with someone ordinary like my fiance. Right now, I am standing in the crowded emergency room waiting area in Nashville after my mother collapsed during a tense family lunch about my upcoming engagement, and through the thin curtain, I overheard her whispering to my father that if she does not recover, she hopes my ordinary job and simple lifestyle do not drag down the family reputation with his relatives. The words cut deep, but they also steel my resolve. I refuse to let her shame or control me any longer, no matter how alone it leaves me. If you have ever felt your own mother measuring your worth by status or who you love, hit that like button and comment below with where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and it means the world. Let me take you back to how this all started, so you can understand why I was even at that lunch in the first place. My name is Isabella Reed, and I have a confession to make. For the past 20 months, I have been keeping a secret from the man I plan to marry and from my own family. Not a small secret like forgetting to call on a birthday. Not a medium secret like hiding a shopping habit. No, my secret was that I make $52,000 a month before taxes. After taxes, it is still the kind of number that makes accountants blink twice and ask if there has been a mistake. I am a senior software architect at one of the largest logistics companies in the Southeast. I have been writing code since I was 14, sold my first app at 23, and have been climbing ever since. I hold 2 patents, I have spoken at regional conferences, and I have stock options that would make most people do a double take. Yet, my fiancé, Ethan Thompson, thought I was an administrative assistant who could barely afford her rent in a modest Nashville apartment. I never actually lied to him. When we met at a coffee shop 20 months ago, he asked what I did, and I said I worked in tech. He nodded like he understood, then asked if I handled scheduling for the executives. I smiled and said something vague about supporting the team. He filled in the blanks himself, and I just never corrected him. Why would I do something like that? Why would I let the man I was falling in love with believe I was struggling financially when I could have bought his car 10 times over? Because I learned something a long time ago from the most important person in my life. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed when I was 9. She lived in a modest house in a quiet Nashville neighborhood, drove an older car, shopped at regular stores, and never wore anything flashy. She taught me to cook simple meals, to appreciate small pleasures, and to never judge my worth by the number in my bank account. What I did not know until she passed when I was 27 was that my grandmother had built a small business empire in her youth, invested wisely, and chosen to live simply because she believed character mattered more than appearance. She left me everything along with a letter I still keep in my nightstand. In that letter, she wrote something I have never forgotten. She said, "A person's true character only shows when they think no one important is watching, when they believe you have nothing to offer them, when they think you are beneath their notice. That is when you see who they really are." So when my mother started pushing hard for me to make the right impression with Ethan's relatives, when she hinted that this engagement might be the moment things got serious, when she mentioned that she was very particular about family image, I made a decision. I would give my mother the test my grandmother had taught me. I would show up at the family lunch she had insisted on hosting as the simple, unassuming daughter she seemed to expect. I would wear modest clothes and speak humbly about my circumstances, and I would watch how she treated someone she thought could not help the family image, someone she thought was beneath her standards, someone she thought had nothing to offer. And before you judge me, before you think I was being manipulative, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what your own mother really thinks of the life you have built? Have you ever had that nagging feeling that the approval is fake and the compliments are hollow? Have you ever wanted to know the truth? Even if it might hurt, I needed to know, because I was not just considering marrying Ethan. I was considering marrying into a life where my mother's opinion would always hover over us. And mothers, as my grandmother also taught me, are forever. The lunch was supposed to be casual, just my parents, my older sister, and Ethan at my mother's house in the Nashville suburbs. I pulled up in my 8-year-old sedan, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, my hair in a low ponytail, with only my grandmother's small silver studs in my ears. I looked exactly like the kind of daughter who did not quite measure up. Perfect. Ethan met me at the door with a quick kiss that felt a little stiff, like he was already bracing for what was coming. His eyes flicked to my outfit, and I saw a flicker of embarrassment cross his face. I filed that away. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and my mother's signature lemon cake, but the air felt thick with expectation. My mother stood in the kitchen like she was holding court in her late 50s, with perfectly styled hair and a crisp blouse that screamed, "I have standards." She extended her hand to me like she was granting an audience. I shook it and felt the cool dismissal in her grip. Then she leaned toward my father and whispered something she thought I could not hear, but I caught every word. She said I looked like I had just come from a shift at the mall instead of meeting my future in-laws. My father cleared his throat, and for a second I thought he might defend me. Instead, he let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded forced, and then said in a booming voice, "Barbara, that is uncalled for, but Isabella, you know your mother only wants the best for the family image. Perhaps you could have dressed up a bit more for your own sake." The words landed like a slap. It was not the uncomfortable silence I expected. It was an active push that somehow made the insult feel shared. My older sister arrived 10 minutes late, which was her usual way of making an entrance. She swept in, wearing a tailored outfit that cost more than my monthly rent, and gave me a single cool hello with a curl of her lip that suggested she had smelled something off. She turned to my mother and started talking about a recent charity gala, excluding me completely. I stood there holding the glass of water my mother had offered, feeling about as welcome as an uninvited guest at her own table. The lunch began, with my mother launching what I would later think of as the interrogation. She asked about my job. I said I worked in tech. She asked if I was a secretary. I said I was more of a support role. My mother nodded knowingly, as if this confirmed everything she had already decided about me. She said it was nice that every team needed support staff, but that it was hardly the kind of position that opened doors for a family like ours. My older sister leaned forward and asked what my grandmother had done for a living. I said she had been a businesswoman with small ventures. My older sister's eyebrows rose slightly. She asked what kind. I said nothing too exciting. The truth, of course, was that my grandmother had built something substantial, but that was not the kind of truth that would serve my purpose today. My mother moved on to Ethan next, praising his marketing job in a way that made it clear she saw him as acceptable, but barely. Then she brought up Lily Morgan, the name dropping into the conversation like a stone into still water. She said she had run into Lily last week, that Lily was doing wonderfully, that her family's connections in real estate were thriving. I watched Ethan's face carefully. Something flickered there, quickly hidden. My mother picked up the thread with enthusiasm. She said Lily had always been such a lovely girl, so accomplished, so well-suited to our family's circle. She had been someone's serious girlfriend years ago. Did I know that I said I did not? My mother smiled. She said it was such a shame when things ended because everyone had expected a different match. The implication was clear. Lily was the right choice. I was not. I looked around the dining room and noticed for the first time the framed photos on the wall behind me, a gallery of family moments. And in several of them, my older sister stood next to people who looked like they belonged in country club magazines. My mother followed my gaze and said nothing, but her satisfaction was almost palpable. My older sister twisted the knife a little deeper. She said Lily was still single. Actually, such a surprise that no one had snatched her up, yet almost like she was waiting for the right opportunity. I turned back to the table and smiled. I said she sounded like a remarkable woman. This was clearly not the response my older sister had expected. She blinked momentarily, thrown off balance. My mother recovered first. She said yes. Lily was remarkable. And then, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, she added that she hoped I would not feel too out of place in their world, given my more modest background. I asked what she meant by modest. My mother's smile grew sharp. She said she understood that not everyone was born into certain advantages, that some people had to work ordinary jobs and live ordinary lives, that there was no shame in being common. Common. She had called me common. I felt something shift inside me, but I kept my expression neutral. My father suddenly pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loud. "Barbara, that is enough," he said, his voice rising in a way I had rarely heard. For one hopeful second, I thought he might finally stand up for me. Then he turned to me, his face flushed, and added, "But Isabella, you have to see it from our side. The family has worked hard for its standing. And sometimes choices have consequences." The flip, from defense to subtle blame, hit harder than any direct insult. It was shocking, in its casual cruelty, the kind of reaction that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my father. My older sister snorted into her wineglass, and the lunch continued with my mother and my older sister taking turns asking questions designed to remind me of my place, which in their minds was somewhere far beneath them. Ethan occasionally made weak attempts to change the subject, but his heart clearly was not in it. My father stayed mostly silent after that, watching with a tired resignation that felt even more frustrating than open agreement. And through it all, I sat there learning everything I needed to know about my mother. By the time dessert arrived, I had learned that my mother measured human worth in social connections and family image. She saw me as an obstacle to be corrected, a mistake she needed to fix. But I had also learned something I had not expected. Ethan was not the man I had thought he was. The Ethan I had fallen in love with was kind and attentive. This Ethan, the one who sat at my mother's table and let her tear me apart without real protest, was someone different. Someone who cared more about approval than defending the woman he claimed to love. I wondered which one was the real Ethan. I was about to find out. After dessert, my mother announced that we would have coffee in the living room. The men drifted toward the windows to discuss business, while my older sister excused herself to make a phone call. My mother said she needed to speak with my father about something and would join us in a moment. This left me alone with my thoughts and a perfect opportunity. I excused myself to find the powder room. As I walked past a partially open door, I heard voices, my mother's and my older sister's. I stopped. Every instinct told me to keep walking, but something in my mother's tone made me pause. Something sharp and urgent. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. My mother was saying that we needed to deal with this situation quickly, that I could not be allowed to make this mistake. My older sister agreed. She said she could not believe I had actually brought Ethan here, that she had thought this was just a phase, like my decision to live in that tiny apartment. My mother said this was more serious than a living choice. This relationship could ruin everything. I felt my heart beating faster. They were talking about me. Of course they were talking about me. But what came next was what really made my blood run cold. My older sister said the timing could not be worse. She said they needed the connection with Lily Morgan's family to go through, and I needed to be with someone who could actually help our standing. My mother agreed. She said the family reputation was in trouble, that they needed a stronger alliance to maintain the lifestyle they had built. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My mother continued. She said Ethan was supposed to keep options open while they worked out the details. That was the plan. Lily's family would provide the social boost, and in return, they would get access to better circles. My mother said Ethan had assured her that he was keeping his options open. Options open. While he was proposing to me, I leaned against the wall, my mind racing. This was not just snobbery. This was calculated. Ethan was not just a man caught between me and my mother. He was part of the plan. My older sister answered my unspoken question. She said Ethan was such a fool. He actually seemed to like this little support staff girl, this nobody. He was supposed to use the relationship as a placeholder until the connection with Lily was finalized. But he was getting attached. A placeholder. That is what I was, a placeholder. a distraction, someone to keep things stable while my mother worked out her social arrangements. My mother said they would handle it. She said they would make the engagement announcement today, get me publicly committed, and then find a way to break things up before the wedding. Once they had Lily secured, they would discover some terrible flaw about me that would justify ending it. My older sister asked what terrible flaw. My mother said they would invent one if necessary. I stood in that hallway, frozen, listening to my mother and my older sister plan the destruction of my relationship like they were planning a grocery list. And then my older sister said something that made everything even worse. She said at least the girl was too naive to suspect anything, that Ethan had picked well in that regard. She was trusting, probably just grateful that someone like him had noticed her at all. My mother laughed and agreed. I stepped back from the door, moving silently down the hallway. My hands were shaking, but not with hurt, with anger. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was naive. They thought I was so desperate for approval that I would accept whatever crumbs they threw my way. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I found the powder room, splashed some cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not broken. She was thinking. I had come here today to test my mother, and she had failed spectacularly. But the test had revealed something I had not expected. My mother herself was part of the problem. She was not just caught between me and family expectations. She was actively deceiving me. The question now was what to do about it. I could confront her. I could walk out there right now and tell everyone exactly what I had heard. I could create a scene, expose their plans, and leave this house forever. But that would be too easy too quick. They would dismiss me as emotional, dramatic, bitter. They would tell themselves that I was just proving their point about me. No, if I was going to respond to this betrayal, I would do it my way on my terms with a plan that they would never see coming. My grandmother had taught me many things, but one lesson stood above all others. She said that when someone underestimates you, they have given you the gift of surprise. My mother had just given me the greatest gift of all. She had no idea what I was capable of. I fixed my makeup, smoothed my hair, and walked back to the living room with a smile on my face. The game was just beginning. When I returned, something had changed. The seating had been rearranged slightly. The lighting adjusted. My mother was standing by the fireplace with a look of barely concealed anticipation. My father had positioned himself near the doorway, looking uncomfortable. My older sister was pretending to examine a painting, but I caught her glancing at Ethan with a smirk, and Ethan was standing in the center of the room, looking nervous. Too nervous. He turned when I entered, and his face broke into what was supposed to be a loving smile. He walked toward me, took my hands in his, and said he wanted to ask me something. I felt the trap closing around me. Ethan said that he knew we had not been together very long, and that my family could be a little overwhelming at first. But he said he knew what he wanted. He said he wanted me, and then he got down on one knee. The ring he produced was large and flashy, exactly the kind of thing my mother would approve of. It was also, I noticed immediately, of questionable quality. The diamond was cloudy, the setting uneven. It was the kind of ring that looked impressive in dim lighting, but would reveal its flaws in the harsh light of day, much like the man holding it. Ethan asked me to marry him. Behind him, my mother was beaming. This was clearly the plan, the first step in their strategy. Get me publicly committed, then find a way to dispose of the relationship later. In the meantime, they would use the engagement to keep Lily waiting, dangling the promise, while they worked out their social arrangements. I understood all of this in the space of a heartbeat. I also understood that I had a choice to make. I could say no. I could reject this proposal from a man who was using me in front of a mother who despised the life I had built. I could walk out with my dignity intact and never see any of them again. But that would end the story too soon. I thought about what I had heard in the hallway. I thought about their plans to invent some flaw about me. I thought about how they saw me as naive, disposable. And I thought about how satisfying it would be to show them exactly how wrong they were. So I said yes. Ethan slipped the ring on my finger, and my mother began clapping like she was at a theater performance. My older sister offered her congratulations with all the warmth of a January morning in Nashville. My father shook Ethan's hand and told him he had done well, but his eyes flicked to me with that same frustrating mix of defensiveness and disappointment. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of forced smiles and small talk. My mother talked about engagement party planning. My older sister discussed venues. My father mentioned social opportunities that might arise from the union, though he stumbled over this, clearly unsure what my side could possibly bring to the table. Ethan stayed close to me, playing the role of devoted fiancé with surprising conviction. If I had not heard what my mother and my older sister had said, I might have believed it, but I had heard and I would never forget. When the lunch finally ended, Ethan walked me to my car. The afternoon air was cool and clear, and for a moment, we just stood there in the driveway looking at each other. He asked if I was okay. He said he knew my mother could be a lot, but he promised she would warm up to me eventually. I said I understood. I said I was just tired. He kissed me goodbye, and I drove away from my mother's house with his ring on my finger and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning, I started my research. If there is one thing my job has taught me, it is the power of information data documentation. I spend my days analyzing systems, finding weaknesses, optimizing solutions. I was about to apply those same skills to my own family, and what I found over the next few days confirmed everything I had heard, and then some. The family's social standing was indeed in trouble, not just a rough patch, but serious structural problems with their circle shrinking and old alliances fading. The connection with Lily's family was not just strategic, it was desperate. But that was not all. As I dug deeper, I found something else, something my mother probably thought was hidden forever. My older sister had been stretching family resources in ways that benefited her lifestyle, while the rest of us were expected to maintain appearances. I printed out everything I found: legal documents, financial statements, records of suspicious transactions, and then I started making phone calls. My grandmother's name still carried weight in certain circles. The business contacts she had cultivated over decades remembered the Reed family with respect. When I reached out, they were happy to talk. One of those contacts happened to know my mother's old acquaintance, Kevin Price. And Kevin, it turned out, had his own history with my mother. They had clashed over a community project years ago. Nothing illegal, just unethical enough to leave a bitter taste. He had been waiting for an opportunity to even the score. I was about to give him that opportunity, or so I thought at the time. Before we continue, I just want to say something from my heart. This story means more to me than you know, and every comment, every subscription helps more than you can imagine. If you are enjoying this so far, would you please take just 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button? It really makes a difference. Thank you. Now back to what happened next. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience and performance. I played the role of the happy fiancé with the skill of an award-winning actress. I attended family dinners at my mother's house. I listened to her passive-aggressive comments with a smile. I watched my older sister flaunt her connections and expensive jewelry, knowing exactly where the priorities lay. And I watched Ethan. He was different now. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. The attentiveness I had once found charming now seemed calculated. The compliments felt rehearsed, and his phone, which he guarded with increasing vigilance, buzzed with messages that he quickly hid from view. I knew who was texting him. I had seen the name flash across his screen more than once. Lily. One evening, I told Ethan I was working late. Instead, I parked near the cafe, where he was supposed to be meeting a client. He was not meeting a client. He was meeting her. I watched through the window as they sat together at a corner table, their heads close together, their body language unmistakably intimate. At one point, he took her hand across the table. At another, she laughed at something he said and touched his face. I took photographs, not because I needed evidence for any legal purpose, but because I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember exactly who Ethan Thompson really was. He was not just weak. He was not just caught in the middle. He was a liar and someone actively maintaining 2 relationships while my mother orchestrated the outcome from behind the scenes. The rage I felt in that moment was white hot and purifying, but I did not act on it. Not yet. Instead, I went home and added the photographs to my growing file. Kevin and I had been meeting regularly, always in secret. He had his own documentation of my mother's questionable social maneuvers. He knew people who had been hurt by her dealings over the years. He was more than willing to help bring things to light. But he asked me why. He said he understood his own motivations, but he wanted to know mine. Was this just about revenge? Or was it something more? I thought about his question for a long time before I answered. I said it was not about revenge. It was about truth. I said my mother had spent her life using her position to manipulate people. She treated anyone she deemed beneath her as disposable. She was raising my older sister to be the same way, and she would keep doing it to others long after I was gone. I said someone needed to show her that her status could not protect her from consequences. Kevin nodded slowly. He said my grandmother would be proud. That was the moment I knew I had made the right choice. The engagement announcement was set for 2 weeks later. My mother was treating it like a social coronation, an opportunity to show off her perfect family to the world. She had no idea what was coming, or so I thought. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I coordinated with my best friend, Amanda Torres, who knew the full truth and had been warning me for months that my mother would never change. I made strategic calls to industry contacts, including my boss, Michael Harlan, who had just promoted me and who reminded me daily that my work spoke for itself. I even reached out to a few of my grandmother's old friends who still remembered her with respect. And then the night before the announcement, I did one last thing. I gave Ethan one final chance to be honest. We were sitting in his apartment going over last-minute details. I asked him casually how he felt about us, about our future. He said he was excited. He said he could not wait to marry me. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me, anything at all. He looked at me with those eyes that I had once found so charming. He said there was nothing. He said I was everything he had ever wanted. I asked about Lily. His face went pale. He recovered quickly, but I had seen the flash of fear in his eyes. He said Lily was just an old friend, nothing more. I nodded and said I understood. And in that moment, I did understand. I understood that Ethan would never tell me the truth. He would lie to my face for as long as it served his purposes. He was my mother's choice through and through. The next day, I put on a dress from my real closet. Not the modest gray sweater I had worn to that family lunch. This was elegant, worth more than everything my mother was wearing combined. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. It was time to show my mother exactly who she had underestimated. But as I drove toward the announcement gathering, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was tight. He said my mother had collapsed at the end of the lunch. The stress of everything had finally caught up with her, and they were in the emergency room. I turned the car around, my heart pounding. That is how I ended up in the waiting room, overhearing the very words that confirmed every fear I had. My mother was stable now. The doctors said it was exhaustion and high blood pressure, but the damage to my trust was done. As I sat there waiting for updates, my best friend Amanda Torres texted me, asking if I was okay. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I had come here to test my mother, and the test had revealed the truth. But now with her in the hospital, the question was whether I had the strength to walk away for good. The doctor came out and said my mother was asking for me. I stood up, my hands steady for the first time all day. I knew what I had to do next, but I had no idea how much it would cost me. I walked into the hospital room where my mother lay propped up on pillows, her face pale but her eyes as sharp as ever. The monitors beeped steadily, while my father stood by the window, looking drained, and my older sister hovered near the bed, scrolling her phone. My mother wasted no time. She motioned me closer with a weak wave of her hand and said in a voice that still carried that familiar edge, "Isabella, I hope this little health scare of mine does not become another excuse for you to keep living in that tiny apartment and pretending your ordinary job is enough for a real future." The words landed like a fresh slap, even though she was hooked up to an IV. She followed it up immediately with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "Your choices are dragging the whole family image down. And now look where it has landed us all in this sterile room because of the stress you keep causing. My father suddenly stepped forward, his face flushing red in a way I had never seen. Barbara is right, Isabella. Your stubborn independence is exactly what put her here today. He burst out, his voice louder than the situation called for. It was not the quiet discomfort from the lunch. It was a full defensive outburst that shocked me into silence. Then, just as quickly, he lowered his tone and pulled me into the hallway for a private moment. His grip firm on my arm. Listen, I agree with your mother on this one, but do not tell her I said it out loud. He whispered, his eyes darting back toward the room. You have always been the one who thinks you can do everything your way, and it is time you face the fact that it is hurting everyone around you, including her health. The flip from public defense of my mother to this cold, private blame felt even more infuriating than open agreement. It left me standing there, questioning every memory I had of him as someone who might one day stand up for me. My older sister joined us in the hallway a moment later, her expression cool. The doctor said it was exhaustion, but we all know the real trigger. She added, her tone laced with the same contempt my mother had shown at lunch. She did not wait for me to respond before turning back to the room. I stayed outside for a minute, gathering my thoughts, then stepped back in. My mother was already sitting up a little straighter, her color returning. She looked straight at me and said, "Now that you are here, we can reschedule the engagement announcement for tomorrow evening at the house. Ethan needs to see that the family is united, and that means you showing up properly, this time not in those jeans, like you are ashamed of us." The demand came out so naturally, it was as if the hospital bed was just another stage for her to control the narrative. I nodded without arguing, because I still needed time to finish what I had started. But inside, my resolve hardened further. That evening, after I left the hospital, I met my best friend, Amanda Torres, at a quiet coffee shop near my apartment. Amanda had been my rock for years, and she knew the full truth about my job and the secret I had been keeping. She listened as I replayed every cutting word from the lunch and the hospital, and her eyes widened when I showed her the photos I had taken of Ethan with Lily. "This is bigger than just snobbery, Isabella," she said, her voice low. "Your mother is treating you like a placeholder for the family image, the same way she treats everyone who does not fit her perfect picture." Amanda offered to help me dig deeper into my mother's social circle, and within hours, she had pulled up public records, showing how my mother had quietly distanced herself from several old friends who no longer matched the status she wanted. It was not illegal, but it painted a clear picture of someone who discarded people the moment they stopped being useful. The next morning, I reached out to Kevin Price, my mother's old acquaintance, who had agreed to meet me in secret at a park on the edge of Nashville. Kevin had his own history with my mother from a community board dispute years ago, and he had been waiting for the right moment to share what he knew. He handed me a folder across the picnic table and said, "Your mother has been curating her social connections for decades, cutting anyone who might make the family look less than perfect. Here are the emails and messages that prove it." I flipped through the pages, my stomach tightening, as I saw how she had quietly spread rumors about people who challenged her view of things. Kevin asked why I was doing this, and I told him the truth. It was about seeing my mother's real character when she thought I had nothing to offer. He nodded and said my grandmother would have approved. That small validation gave me the strength I needed to keep going. Back at work, my colleague, Charlotte Ellis, noticed I was distracted and pulled me aside in the break room. Charlotte had been promoted alongside me last year, and she knew my real role as senior software architect, even if the family did not. "Whatever is going on at home, it is showing in your focus," she said gently but firmly. "You are one of the best on the team, Isabella. Do not let family drama derail the project deadline we have coming up in 2 weeks." Her words reminded me that I had a life and a career outside my mother's control, and I promised her I would handle it. But as the day went on, a new text from my older sister arrived saying my mother was being discharged early and expected everyone at the rescheduled announcement gathering that evening. The pressure was building like a storm I could see coming but could not yet outrun. That afternoon, I sat in my apartment reviewing everything I had gathered. The financial records showed my mother had been stretching family resources to maintain appearances while quietly pushing my older sister toward better social matches. I printed the key pages and added them to the file, along with the photos of Ethan and Lily. My hands were steady, but my mind raced with the realization that this was no longer just about testing my mother. It was about protecting myself from a lifetime of being treated as second best. I changed into the elegant dress I had bought months ago, the one my mother had never seen, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was ready, but I still had no idea how the evening would end. Just as I grabbed my keys, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mother addressed to the whole family. It read, "Everyone be on time tonight, and Isabella, make sure you dress appropriately this time, or we will have to rethink this entire engagement for the sake of the family reputation." The message ended with a single emoji of a heart, but it felt like a threat. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen because I knew the gathering was only hours away, and I was about to walk into it, carrying the full weight of everything I had uncovered. I drove toward my mother's house, the folder of evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. My father had texted me separately earlier, saying he hoped I would not make a scene tonight because my mother was still recovering, and any stress could send her back to the hospital. The message felt like another layer of manipulation, designed to keep me quiet. When I pulled up, the driveway was already lined with cars from the small circle my mother had invited. I took a deep breath and walked inside, where the living room had been rearranged for the announcement. My mother was seated in the center chair, looking composed in a fresh outfit, as if the hospital stay had never happened. She spotted me immediately, and her first words were sharp enough to cut glass. "Isabella, finally, you decided to join us properly dressed. Let us hope this version of you is the one Ethan actually wants to marry, and not the one who keeps embarrassing the family with her ordinary choices." The room went quiet for a second, and my older sister nodded in agreement from across the space. My father cleared his throat, and for a moment, I braced for another outburst. But instead, he simply said in a low voice, "Let us get this over with before anything else happens." It was the kind of quiet enablement that frustrated me more than open conflict, because it showed he would never truly challenge her. Ethan stood beside me, looking nervous, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. My mother raised her glass and began to speak about how proud she was of the match, and how it would strengthen the family image in ways my previous lifestyle never could. The words were laced with the same contempt I had heard in the hallway and in the hospital. I listened knowing the folder in my bag held the power to change everything. But I waited for the perfect moment, because I wanted her to feel the full weight of her own underestimation. Just as my mother finished her toast and motioned for Ethan to step forward, my phone vibrated in my pocket with an incoming message from an unknown number. I glanced down, and my blood ran cold. The text read, "We know what you have been digging into Isabella. Stop now, or the family will make sure your little secret career ends before it ruins everything we have built." The message was unsigned, but I recognized the style instantly. It had my mother's fingerprints all over it. My hands started to shake as I realized someone close had been watching me the entire time, and the gathering was about to become far more dangerous than I had planned. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my mind racing with the question of who had sent it and what they would do next when I finally revealed the truth. The threatening text had me frozen in place, just as my mother spotted my distraction and launched straight into her attack. "Isabella, is that your phone more important than this family moment? Or is it another one of your so-called support role distractions that keep you from ever measuring up to what we expect from a real daughter?" Her voice dripped with that cold sarcasm she had perfected over the years, the words slicing right into the deepest insecurities she knew I carried about my place in the family. She did not stop there. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she added, "You have always been the one who thinks your little tech hobbies make you special." But let me tell you, they have only ever made you a liability to the family image, and now you are proving it right here in front of everyone. My older sister jumped in immediately, nodding along with a sharp smile. Exactly. And after everything our mother has been through with her health, you still cannot put the family first for one evening. The room of about 20 guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. My father stood there for a long second, his face going through visible shock as he processed what my mother had just said in front of everyone. Then, without warning, he let out a forced, awkward laugh that echoed too loudly in the living room, as if trying to turn the whole thing into some kind of joke. Ha ha, Barbara, you are being dramatic, but Isabella, your mother, is still recovering from the hospital, and here you are checking your phone like none of it matters. The laugh died quickly, and the performative tone flipped into something colder when he pulled me aside into the hallway. A minute later, his voice dropping to a private ultimatum. If you do not apologize right now and drop whatever attitude this is, consider yourself cut off from any future family support or decisions we make about the will. Your mother's health cannot take more of your selfishness. The sudden shift from public deflection to this shocking private threat left me reeling because it was the first time he had ever put it in those exact terms, and it felt like a door slamming shut. I could not hold back any longer. I stepped back into the room and looked straight at my mother. I heard you and my older sister at the lunch planning to use me as a placeholder until a better social match came along. I know about the way you have been stretching family resources, and I have proof of how you treat anyone who does not fit your perfect picture. I pulled out the folder and laid the key pages on the coffee table, including the messages and the photos of Ethan with Lily. My mother's face hardened, but she recovered instantly, initiating another vicious jab. Proof. You mean the paranoid nonsense you have been digging into, because you cannot accept that your ordinary life is a disappointment to everyone here. You are naive. Isabella always have been thinking, your little secrets make you clever, when they only prove how ungrateful you are for the chances we have given you. Her words were laced with long-held resentment, hitting every button she knew would hurt, and the psychological blow landed exactly as she intended. My best friend, Amanda Torres, had texted me earlier offering backup, but I had not replied yet, and now my colleague, Sarah Mitchell, sent a quick message, checking if I was okay, because she knew I had been distracted at work all week. Those small lifelines felt distant as the room turned against me. Victor Lang, an old family friend who had been invited to the gathering, cleared his throat and said quietly that perhaps we should all calm down. But my mother ignored him and kept going. You think exposing a few things will change anything? It only shows why we needed to steer Ethan towards someone who actually understands our world. Ethan shifted beside me, looking pale, but he said nothing strong enough to matter. My father tried one more time to smooth it over with another awkward laugh that fell flat before he simply walked out of the room in quiet anger, without another word to me. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there feeling the weight of every jab, every demand, every underestimation my mother had ever thrown at me. Then I did the only thing that felt right. I looked at my mother directly and said, I am setting a firm boundary right now. I will not be part of this anymore. I choose myself. And that means I am done letting you define my worth or my future. I took off the engagement ring and placed it on the table next to the folder. My mother's response came fast and cutting. Fine, then go live your ordinary life and see how long it lasts without the family behind you. You have always been the one who never quite fit anyway. My older sister smirked, and my father did not come back into the room. Ethan tried a weak, wait, Isabella, but I was already turning toward the door. I walked out of my mother's house that evening with nothing but my purse and the folder under my arm. The driveway felt longer than it ever had, and when I reached my car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. My phone buzzed with a final message from my father. It was short and final. Your mother is right. If this is how you repay everything we have done, then do not expect any more contact or support from us. I deleted it without replying, and drove away from the house for what I knew would be the last time. The next few days blurred together. I went back to work, where my boss, Michael Harlan, praised a project I had just finished, but even that success felt hollow because I could not share it with family. Amanda and Sarah both reached out offering to meet for coffee, but I turned them down gently because I needed space to process the loneliness that had settled in my chest like a permanent weight. 2 weeks later, I received official word through a lawyer that my mother had updated the family arrangements to exclude me from any future decisions or support. It was not dramatic or public. It was quiet and final, just like her style. I sat in my small apartment that night, staring at the letter and touching the simple silver studs from my grandmother that I still wore every day. The lesson I had learned was clear. My mother's true character had shown itself when she thought I had nothing to offer, and it had confirmed that I could never change her. I had chosen myself by setting those boundaries, but the cost was real. There was no triumphant revenge, no restored relationships, no satisfying closure. There was only the quiet reality of self-preservation and the emotional isolation that came with it. I was alone in a way I had never been before, but I was finally free from the constant measuring and the constant jabs. Some doors, once closed, stay closed, and sometimes that is the only way forward, even if it leaves you sitting in an empty apartment, wondering if the price was worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to set boundaries with your own mother and ended up feeling more isolated than ever before, drop a comment below and tell me what happened, because I read every single one, and it helps knowing I am not the only one who has walked this path.